Reach out and touch the nearest object that isn't wood, metal, glass, or stone. You're almost certainly touching oil. Not a drop of it, not a smell of it. The thing itself, transformed. The case of your phone, the frame of your glasses, the fiber in the shirt on your back, the paint on your wall, the sole of your shoe, the lid of your coffee cup, the keys you type on. Before you were fully awake this morning, you had already handled petroleum a dozen times and never once thought the word oil, because we have hidden it so completely inside everything else that we forgot it was there. And here's the part that should stop you. You didn't just touch it, you ate it. The food on your plate was grown with it, shipped with it, and this is not a figure of speech, partly made of it, built out of atoms that came up out of an oil or gas well. Roughly half the people alive on Earth right now are alive because of it. We are taught to think of oil as the stuff we burn to go places. That is the smallest part of the story. The truth is that the modern world is not powered by oil. It is built out of oil. And so, increasingly, are you. This is the story of how the compressed corpses of an ancient ocean became the blood of the entire human race. And what happens to the body when you try to drain it? To understand what oil really is, you have to start a very long time ago, with something dying. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the surface of the ancient oceans was thick with tiny life, microscopic plankton and algae, drifting in unimaginable numbers, doing the one thing that powers all life on this planet, catching sunlight. Every one of those organisms was a tiny solar panel, turning the light of a sun that was already old into the chemistry of being alive. And then they died, and they sank. Not for a year or 1,000 years, but continuously, for tens of millions of years, a slow, endless snow of dead microscopic life settling into the mud at the bottom of seas that no longer exist. Buried there, cut off from oxygen, crushed under the accumulating weight of more mud and more time, that organic sludge was cooked. Heat and pressure went to work on it across spans of time the human mind cannot hold, and slowly transformed it into a dark, energy-dense liquid, petroleum. Here's the fact that should never feel ordinary. Oil is sunlight. It is ancient sunlight, the light of a prehistoric sun, captured by living things, packed into chemical bonds, and then locked underground for 100 million years like a battery the planet forgot it was charging. When you burn a liter of gasoline, you are releasing energy that a leafless, lifeless ocean captured from the sky before the dinosaurs walked. We did not invent this energy. We inherited it. We are spending down a one-time gift that took the Earth 100 million years to wrap. And it is fantastically, almost obscenely concentrated. Think about what that buried sunlight actually does for us. A single barrel of oil contains so much usable energy that, to do the same amount of physical work by hand, a human being would have to labor for years. Fill a car's tank and you are carrying the equivalent of weeks or months of someone's back-breaking effort, ready to be spent in an afternoon at the press of a pedal. The modern person, without ever noticing, commands the work of an invisible army of hundreds of tireless servants. Not slaves of flesh, but slaves of fire, each one a portion of that ancient bottled sun. Every comfort you think of as normal is built on this silent labor force. We are the first humans in history to be this rich in energy, and we got that way by learning to dig up and burn the deep past. For almost all of human history, this treasure sat underground, useless, while people scraped by on the thin, real-time sunlight of muscle, wind, and burning wood. The entire drama of the modern world begins at the moment we learn to bring it up. And to feel just how lopsided that gift is, hold one more number. The crude we burn so casually is the distilled residue of staggering quantities of ancient life. By one careful estimate, the plant and plankton matter that went into a single gallon of gasoline weighed something like 100 tons when it was alive. Every time you fill a tank, you are burning the buried remains of an ancient meadow the size of a small field. Stretch that across the whole planet, and humanity now burns, every single year, an amount of ancient life that would have taken the living Earth centuries, by some calculations, hundreds of years, to grow. We are drawing down the savings of deep time at a rate the planet could never replenish, spending each year what took ages to deposit. No previous civilization could even have dreamed of energy like this, and none had to reckon with what it cost to spend a 100 million year inheritance in the span of a few human lifetimes. The moment has a date and a place. 1859, a small valley in Pennsylvania where a man named Edwin Drake did something everyone had told him was foolish. He drilled a hole in the ground specifically to find oil, and at 69 feet, the oil came up. It sounds quaint. It was the starting gun of the modern age. What did the world want it for at first? Light. Before petroleum, if you wanted to read after dark, the best fuel for your lamp came from a whale, specifically the oil rendered from the bodies of sperm whales, hunted across every ocean on Earth until their populations were collapsing. The richest light in the world was made of dead whales, and we were running out of them. Then refiners learned to distill a clean-burning lamp fuel, kerosene, out of Drake's black crude, and almost overnight petroleum did what no conservation movement could. It made whale killing unprofitable. The first thing oil ever saved was the whales. Hold on to that irony because oil's gift and oil's curse are always the same substance. Into this new industry stepped one of the most ruthless organizers in the history of capitalism, John D. Rockefeller. He didn't strike oil. He did something far more powerful. He controlled the refining and the transport, squeezing every rival until they sold out or died, until his Standard Oil owned almost the entire flow of oil in America. He built the first great modern monopoly, became the richest man of his age, and was so dominant that the government eventually broke his empire into pieces by law. But the lesson he'd proven outlived him. Whoever controls the choke points of oil controls everything downstream of it. That lesson would soon stop being about money and start being about survival. Around him, oil rewrote the rhythm of human life with terrifying speed. Sleepy valleys became boom towns overnight. Mud streets crowded with derricks and speculators, and men made suddenly insanely rich, and just as suddenly ruined when the well ran dry. It was a frenzy, a gold rush in black, and it minted the first fortunes of a new kind of economy. But the deeper change was quieter and went everywhere. For the first time, ordinary people had cheap, bright light on demand, and the day no longer ended when the sun went down. Work, reading, factories, the very length of human waking life stretched into the night. Before anyone fully understood what they had found, oil had already begun doing what it does best, slipping invisibly into the texture of normal life until a world without it became unimaginable. Because there was a part of the barrel nobody wanted. When you refined crude into kerosene for lamps, you were left with a volatile, dangerous byproduct that early refiners considered near worthless and sometimes simply dumped into rivers. It was called gasoline. And then a machine appeared that would turn that garbage into the most fought-over liquid on the planet, the automobile. The internal combustion engine drank gasoline, the car put the world on wheels, and the useless byproduct became the prize. In the space of a generation, oil stopped being about how you lit your house and became about how, and whether, your entire nation could move. And the car did not just move people. It remade the surface of the earth to suit itself. Whole cities were torn up and rebuilt around the automobile. Roads, suburbs, parking, the petrol station on every corner, until the shape of modern life itself was poured into a mold defined by the engine and its fuel. Distance collapsed. A person could now live one place and work another, eat food grown a continent away, and cross in an afternoon a span that once took weeks. Within decades, the entire developed world had rebuilt its geography, its economy, and its daily habits around the assumption of cheap, abundant oil, an assumption so total that we stopped seeing it, the way a fish stops seeing water. We didn't adopt oil, we rearranged civilization around it. And the instant a nation's power depended on oil, oil became something men would kill for on a scale never seen before. The turning point came just before the First World War, and it was a deliberate choice by one man. As head of the British Navy, Winston Churchill decided to convert the Royal Navy's warships from coal to oil. Oil-burning ships were faster, could refuel at sea, and needed fewer men shoveling fuel, a decisive military edge. But it came with a terrible hook. Britain had plentiful coal and almost no oil. To run its navy, the empire that ruled the seas now had to secure oil from somewhere else, far away, in a region most Britons couldn't find on a map, Persia and the Middle East beyond it. In that single decision, the world's great powers were chained, permanently, to a part of the planet they would spend the next century manipulating, propping up, invading, and bleeding for. The modern map of the Middle East was drawn, in large part, by the thirst of foreign engines. From that moment, the great wars of the 20th century were, underneath everything else, wars about oil. The First World War was the first conflict of engines, tanks, trucks, planes, ships, and it was said afterward that the Allies had floated to victory on a sea of oil. The Second World War made the lesson absolute. Germany had almost no oil of its own and spent the war desperate for it, hurling its armies toward the oil fields of the Caucasus and grinding to a halt again and again when the fuel ran dry. Japan, strangled by an American oil embargo, gambled its entire existence on seizing the oil fields of Southeast Asia, and the road to that gamble ran straight through Pearl Harbor. Tanks without fuel are scrap metal. Planes without fuel are decoration. The side with the oil won, and everyone who fought learned, in blood, that this black liquid was now the deciding material of human power. After the war, the weapon changed hands. The nations sitting on top of the world's richest oil, many of them in the Middle East, realized that the thing every modern economy now needed to breathe was under their sand. In 1973, they turned off the tap. The oil-producing states cut supply, the price of oil quadrupled almost overnight, and the mightiest economies on Earth, America, Europe, Japan, were brought to their knees by lines at gas stations and factories going dark. It was a revelation. The most powerful countries in the world could be choked by a decision made a continent away. Oil had become leverage, and ever since, behind the official reasons given for embargoes, coups, alliances, and invasions, there has almost always been a second, quieter reason measured in barrels. They called it many things. Critics kept calling it the same thing: blood for oil. The shock of the 1970s wired oil permanently into the machinery of global power. Because the world's oil was priced and sold in US dollars, every nation that needed oil, which is every nation, needed dollars to buy it. And that quiet arrangement helped keep the dollar at the center of the world economy long after anything else justified it. Oil didn't just move armies, it propped up a currency, and through it, an empire. A second price shock at the end of the decade, triggered by revolution in Iran, hammered the lesson home again. And in the decades that followed, the great powers fought war after war in the oil-rich regions of the world, always for reasons that sounded loftier than petroleum, and almost always with a pipeline somewhere in the background. And the curse fell hardest on the lands that held the prize. You would think that sitting on an ocean of oil would make a nation rich and free. Astonishingly often, it does the opposite. Economists have a grim name for it: the resource curse. When a country's wealth comes gushing out of the ground instead of out of the work of its people, whoever seizes the wells seizes the nation. Rulers no longer need their citizens' labor or consent, only the oil fields. And so the money buys armies and palaces instead of schools and freedom. Across the world, some of the most oil-soaked nations on Earth became some of the most corrupt, most unequal, and least free, drowning in money and starving in every other way. The blood of the modern world poisoned many of the bodies it flowed out of. But here is where the familiar story: oil as fuel, oil as the thing we fight wars to burn, turns out to be hiding the bigger secret. Because while the world was watching the wars over gasoline, oil was quietly doing something far stranger and far more total. It was getting inside everything. Take crude apart in a refinery, and you don't just get fuels. You get a stream of chemical building blocks. And starting in the 20th century, chemists learned to snap those building blocks together into materials that had never existed in nature. The most famous is plastic. Plastic is, in essence, solidified oil: cheap, moldable, sterile, eternal. And once we had it, we remade the physical world out of it. Look around the room you're in and try to count the objects that contain no plastic at all. It's harder than counting the ones that do. In a single human lifetime, petroleum became the default substance of human civilization. Our packaging, our furniture, our tools, our toys, our clothing, the casing of every device, the pipes in the walls, the very fabric of the carpet under your feet. But plastic is not even the deepest hook. The deepest hook is food. Follow it carefully, because this is the fact almost no one knows, and it is the heart of the whole story. To grow crops at modern scale, You need nitrogen fertilizer. For all of history, that nitrogen was scarce. It limited how much food the earth could grow, and therefore how many humans could exist. Then, in the early 20th century, chemists cracked a way to pull nitrogen out of the air and fix it into fertilizer. And the cheapest way to do that runs on fossil fuels, mostly natural gas, used both as the raw ingredient and the energy. We learned, in effect, to turn fossil fuel into plant food, and plant food into crops, and crops into people. The harvests exploded. The human population, which had crept along for millennia, roughly quadrupled in a single century. So sit with the consequence, because it is staggering. By the most careful estimates, around half of the people alive on this planet today are fed by food that exists only because of synthetic fertilizer made from fossil fuels. Half. If that supply vanished, a number of humans larger than every person who lived in the entire ancient world would have nothing to eat. We did not just learn to burn the ancient sun for power, we learned to eat it. The nitrogen knitted into your own muscles and brain, right now, very likely passed through a factory running on natural gas before it ever became a plant, an animal, or you. In the most literal, atomic sense, modern humans are partly built out of fossil fuel. There is a dark symmetry hiding in that miracle. The chemist whose process pulled food out of thin air was also, in the very same years, the man who pioneered poison gas for the battlefields of the First World War. The same genius that learned to make bread from the atmosphere learned to make death from it. And both gifts came out of the same mastery over the molecules that fossil fuels made cheap. It is the oil story in miniature, told one more time. The power to feed multitudes and the power to kill them, drawn from a single source, impossible to separate. And fertilizer was only the beginning of what the refinery learned to build. From the same barrels came synthetic rubber, when natural supplies were cut off in wartime, and whole armies rolled on tires conjured out of petroleum. From them came the pesticides that guarded the swollen harvests, the synthetic fabrics that clothe most of the planet, the detergents, the adhesives, the dyes, the lubricants, the asphalt under every road, and a vast share of modern medicine, the raw feedstock of countless pharmaceuticals that keep people alive. The explosion of food and the explosion of people and the explosion of things were all the same explosion, and its fuse was lit underground. We call it the modern world. It might as well be called the petroleum world, because there is hardly a single thread of it that doesn't trace back somewhere to a well. This is the twist the fuel and war story misses entirely. We could, in principle, replace oil's energy. The sun still shines, the wind still blows. But oil and gas are not only energy. They are the material of our stuff and the fertilizer of our food, and that is the addiction nobody campaigns against, because it is invisible. The car is the part of the oil age you can see. The plastic and the bread are the part you're made of. So come back to where we started, to you, in your room, with your dozen unnoticed pieces of petroleum. Now you can see them for what they are. That isn't a phone case. It's refined crude, molded into a shape. That isn't a sweater. It's oil spun into thread. The vegetables in your fridge were grown in soil fed by fossil nitrogen, picked by machines running on diesel, wrapped in plastic, and carried 1,000 miles to you on engines burning the ancient sun. The meal you'll eat today costs more energy in fossil fuel than it will ever give you back in calories. By some measures, it can take something like 10 units of fossil energy to deliver a single unit of food energy to a modern plate. We are, in a sense, no previous human could have imagined, eating petroleum with every bite, laundered through the plant and the animal so we never taste it. Replay an ordinary morning and watch it light up. The alarm in a plastic phone wakes you on a foam mattress wrapped in synthetic sheets. You cross a carpet woven from oil, dress in clothes spun from it, and brush your teeth with a plastic brush and a plastic tube. Your breakfast arrives in plastic, grown with fossil fertilizer, carried by diesel from somewhere you'll never see. You ride to work inside a machine that is half petroleum by volume, the dashboard, the seats, the tires, the fuel, past roads laid down in oil, under wires sheathed in it, into a building full of it. By the time most people have their second cup of coffee, they have leaned on the buried ancient ocean 100 times over and called it nothing more than Tuesday. The dependence is not a fact about industry or war happening far away. It is the wallpaper of your life, so close and so constant that it has become invisible. And it has gone further than your plate, all the way into your tissue. As we filled the world with plastic, the plastic began to break into pieces too small to see, microplastics. And those fragments are now everywhere. In the deepest ocean trenches, in mountain rain, in the bodies of animals, and in us. Researchers have found these tiny shards of petroleum in human blood, in human lungs, in the placentas of unborn children. The substance we pulled from the bottom of a dead ancient sea, refined and shaped into the conveniences of our lives, is now circulating inside the living human body. The blood of the modern world has quietly become a trace of blood in us. There's no cleaner proof of the thesis. We did not just build our civilization out of oil. We are absorbing it back into ourselves. This is what total dependence actually looks like. Not a fuel gauge, a world and a body, with petroleum woven through every layer. Your light, your food, your clothes, your medicine, your tools, your transport, and now your cells. We are the most comfortable, best fed, most mobile humans who have ever lived. And we are that way because we are saturated to the marrow in the compressed remains of an ocean that died before the continents took their present shape. Every inheritance gets spent, and every spree leaves a bill. Oil's bill arrives in two envelopes. The first is written in the sky. For 100 million years, the carbon in all that ancient life was locked safely underground, out of the air. In a little over a century and a half, we have been digging it up and burning it back into the atmosphere, releasing, in a few short human lifetimes, carbon that the planet took an unfathomable span of time to bury. The air now holds more of this carbon than it has in millions of years, and the climate is shifting in response. Because you cannot set fire to 100 million years of stored sunlight in 200 years and expect the sky to stay the same. The same buried treasure that gave us our power is, by the simple physics of combustion, also rewriting the conditions our civilization was built to live in. The gift and the curse, once again, are the exact same substance. The second envelope is the trap of dependence itself. And to feel it, do one last thing. Don't imagine running out of fuel. Imagine, as a thought experiment, that all the oil simply vanished tomorrow and walk through what falls. The cars stop, of course, that's the obvious one. But keep going. The trucks stop, so the shelves in the shops empty within days, because almost nothing you eat is grown where you live. The tractors and harvesters stop, and the fertilizer factories go cold, so next year's harvest collapses, and with it, the food that keeps half the world alive. The plastic stops, which means the syringes, the IV bags, the sterile packaging, the medical devices, the water pipes, half the modern hospital. Your clothes, the synthetic ones, are no longer made. The roads are no longer paved because asphalt is oil. The phone in your hand is a final object, a thing that cannot be replaced. Layer by layer, the modern world doesn't just slow down, it disassembles, because we did not build it to run on oil. We built it out of oil, and you cannot pull the foundation out from under a house and ask it to keep standing. That is the real meaning of the title, and it is not poetry. Blood is the thing that reaches every cell of a body, carries what each one needs to live, and cannot be removed without killing the whole. By that definition, oil is precisely, literally, the blood of the modern world. It is in your engine and your dinner and your shirt and your veins. We spent 100 million years of buried sunlight to build the most extraordinary civilization that has ever existed. And we built it so thoroughly out of that one dark, finite, ancient liquid that we now have to answer the hardest question a species has ever faced. Not how to keep burning it, but how to build a body that can live without the blood it was made from. We learn to dig up the dead and bring them to life as everything we own. The reckoning is learning to live, once again, on sunlight that arrives today. Next time on Everyday Empires, a single thread, soft as a whisper and worth more than gold, that bound the east to the west, carried plagues across continents, and was guarded by an empire on pain of death. Silk.